Welcome back to Live from Occupy City Hall. My name is Leslie Rolfe. I'm a member of the May 30th Alliance. And in this episode, we're going to speak about things that could have been done differently to preserve Mark Barmore's life and to prevent a host of people from being traumatized. I believe any conversation about police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice has to be anchored with certain concepts and an understanding of certain concepts and people having a belief in certain concepts. And one of those concepts is empathy. And I think before we can really have meaningful conversations about police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice, we have to begin to define what empathy means to each one of us, or begin to figure out what the definition of empathy is to each one of us, I should say. And then we need to figure out what our definition of empathy as a society is. And then we have to also figure out individually and societally whether we are living up to those concepts and ideas of empathy, and what things we can do to begin to live up to those ideas and concepts if we're falling short of them. And for some people, empathy is not a concept or idea that they believe in. And again, those people will never be able to fully grasped the nature of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice, because to have an understanding of these things, you need to have some sort of understanding and belief in empathy. And so when empathizing with Mark Barmore and what took place to Mark Barmore, I can disagree with actions that he may have allegedly took when it comes to his interactions with his girlfriend, whether that be the threatening or whether that be the putting the knife to her. I wouldn't justify those actions the same way I wouldn't justify the actions of these police officers killing Mark Barmore. I think that life is too precious of a thing for it to be devalued at the rate in which violence devalues life. However, what I would say is that we have a criminal justice system that is in place that says the penalty for the things Mark Barmore was accused of have doing are not capital punishment penalties, are not death penalties. And so Mark Barmore being killed is disproportionate to the actions that he was alleged to have taken. Also, it is, if justice is somebody committing a crime and then being arrested and being charged and going to court and dealing with whatever comes from the court case, if that is what justice is, then injustice is somebody being cut off from that right to go through that system. And so Mark Barmore was not afforded that right to go through that system. And so that is an injustice. And so once both of those things I really dived into deeper than I can do in a 10-minute video, you get to a place where we can move forward with speaking about things these officers could have done differently to prevent Mark Barmore from being murdered and to prevent these people who were there on the day of the murder from being traumatized, and a host of other people who were connected to all of these individuals from being traumatized. And one of the first things that stands out is how quickly all of these events occurred. When we're reading through this pamphlet and when you're listening to me speak about it, it seems like this would take place in a much longer process than just a little over 2.5 minutes. But we read how from the point of them seeing Mark Barmore, chasing him into the building, chasing him into the basement of the building, following him into the boiler room of the building, and then shooting and killing him, all happened in just over 2 minutes. And that's too quick for anybody to decide somebody's life is no longer of value. And that is what they decided when they chose to shoot him instead of bringing him in one piece. And there were so many moments in which they could have evacuated the building. They could, if the other people in the building was of the utmost importance, their safety, as they spoke about being worried about him taking hostages, then the first thing that you do is evacuate the building. One of those officers get those children, get those teachers, counselors out of the building as they engage Mark Barmore. And then again, that engagement with Mark Barmore is one that should be centered on bringing him in alive. and bringing him in handcuffs and putting him through the court system. It is not up for these police officers to be judge, jury, and executioner on the scene just because somebody's fight or flight instinct kicked in. And it is only in situations with police officers that you are told that you have to disregard thousands of years of fight or flight reflexes that exist within this people's psychology and people's biology. And so you shouldn't be killed for those things. Also, within the passages that we read, it was stated that they followed him into a dark boiler room. And so even when we're given the accounts of what these police officers say happened, that has to be taken with some sort of grain of salt, because they've told us a portion of these events took place in a dark room. And people have done all types of psychological experiments and done psychological analysis that shows that multiple witnesses remember different events or different crime scenes drastically differently than they actually took place. And so even if it was moments after or however long after that they gave a statement, and then a couple of days later they gave another statement and those things lined up, that doesn't mean that what they perceive to have happened is actually what happened. And so we're also given account of two other witnesses on the scene who say different things happened than these police officers happened. And these police officers have an incentive to say it happened in one way. These other two witnesses are not the family of Mark Barmore, are not loved ones of Mark Barmore. They're just people who are on the scene, and they have no incentive in saying these things happened in a different way than they happened. One of the other things that stands out is the forensic evidence. And in one portion, we do read about how a bullet was jammed in Odapool's gun, and that's consistent with the idea of the hand being on the barrel of a gun. But we also read how Mark Barmore's fingerprints and DNA Mark Barmore didn't have gunshot residue on his hand, and his fingerprints weren't on the barrel of the gun. And so, again, we're giving contrasting pieces of evidence that let us know that, yes, it is a possibility it happened in the way the officers are telling us, but there is a distinct probable possibility it didn't happen in that way. I don't know why I said probable possibility, but that was bad grammar. And there was also a disregard for how killing a man in front of these children, in front of these teachers, these counselors, these other people at this building, these other bystanders, a complete disregard for how that was going to psychologically affect them, for how their lives were going to be from that day going forward. And you have two witnesses who are stating that they seen him be killed. There have been stories about how multiple children who were there on that day, who are now adults, how they were permanently traumatized from these events, had PTSD from these events. And so that is a devaluing of these children's lives, of these children's future. This is something that happened in 2009, and there'll be people who say, well, this was however many years ago, what's the relevancy that it has now? But we want to lay out a pattern. We want to show the cycle. We want to show how often these things have happened and how far back they have occurred, and the different levels of inhumaneness that some of them have had. And Mark Barmore's level of inhumaneness was through the roof. And Odapool and Stan North were both found justified for doing this shooting. Neither of them were penalized by the police department. Stan North would leave the police department, but he would do it on his own accord and would be given his pension after he left. Odapool, after leaving on his own accord, would struggle with the city of Rockford, but backed by the police union, would eventually be reinstated when Mayor Tom McNamara took office, and then he would retire and be given his tens of thousands of dollars in his pension. Because there has been such a culture of impunity, because there has been no accountability, no responsibility being taken by these institutions, these things have continued to occur. And this is why there is a disconnect between the police department in the city and the community, because for decades upon decades, people have seen these police departments devalue people's lives. They have read stories about them killing people in the streets. And so you lose your credibility with the citizens when these things are constantly occurring at the rate that they have occurred in the Winnebago County area.